Okay, to start the discussions. Today, as you're aware that we are going to be speaking, I'll be speaking and you'll be listening to me speaking about Begum Samru. And a lot of you might be familiar with Begum Samru, and there will be some of you who might not have heard about her. And therefore, the idea is to introduce to you a personality who was quite spectacular, quite unlike any other, and needs more research on and more reading on. So this is just going to be an introduction. I'm not going into too much details about her life and things like that. It's just to introduce you to somebody who needs more recognition in terms of the history of Delhi. Before I come to who is Begum Samru, I am going to give you an idea about I'm going to give you an idea about the time period that we are talking about, what's happening in Delhi, and how those situations actually help Begum Samru to survive, to make something out of herself. Now, we are talking about the second half of 1700s, so it's 18th century, and the first half of 1800s, so 19th century. 18th century and 19th century is the time period that we are looking at. And we are well aware about the year 1857, and that's the year when the uprising against the British takes place. And officially, the power shifts from the Mughal hands into the British hand. And therefore, this period, fag end of 1700s and early 1800s, is a time period of a lot of turmoil that is happening in India. The Mughal rule is on its decline. A lot of its rulers, maybe they have a good intention to consolidate their power again, as it was during the time of the greater Mughals, but they're failing miserably. And while that is happening, there are a lot of regional political powers who are also vying for their control over Delhi. Delhi has always been the center of power for many, many centuries. So Delhi as a city is very, very important. Plus, the mighty Mughal throne is right here in Delhi, and therefore everybody is trying to try and get some control over Delhi so that they can validate themselves and validate their power in northern India. So it is quite a turbulent period. Shah Alam is the ruler who plays a very important role during the coming up of Begum Samru and how she consolidates her power. But Shah Alam himself had been quite unlucky in terms of his lifespan, not only his reign, but his lifespan as well. He had seen quite turbulent times, starting right from the invasion of Nadir Shah, Ahmad Shah Abdali, and the the assassination of his father, and later on towards the end of his life he is blinded as well. So he sees a lots of ups and downs during his lifespan. And Begum Samru in these times actually protects him and saves him twice of his life, and putting herself self in harm's way, she saves his life. And that is one of the reasons why she falls into the good books uh, of the Mughal ruler, and he actually gives her the title of the most beloved daughter as well. Now, Begum Samru, coming to her life, where she started from, and how did she actually become what she is best known for, leading men into battle and things like that. She was actually the daughter of an Arab nobleman, and she's said to have been born in the 1970s or 1971, anything between 1970, sorry, not 19, 1750 and 1753. Sorry about that. I'm horrible with dates. Some of you have attended my walks and you'll know exactly how bad I am with that. So, everybody else, please excuse me for my horrible remembrance of dates. I'm only going to give you dates wherever I'm absolutely comfortable with and absolutely sure about. So 1750 to 1753, different historians give different dates of her birth, and soon after her birth, she loses her father. She was barely about 8, 9, or 10 years old when she loses her father, and that's when her mother brings her to Delhi. And when she comes to Delhi, she stays at a courtesan's house, and a courtesan basically would be a tawayaf, and the house would be probably a kotha. And here you also have to understand that when I use the word tawayaf, it's not in the current context of how tawayafs could be misinterpreted currently as prostitutes. Tawayafs back in the medieval times had a very important role to play in the society, and they were quite respected in a manner because they did entertain people during the evenings, but during the day, the kota of a tawaf would have been the place where the young men or young boys of the royal household or nobility would actually come in to learn etiquettes. So she had an important role to play, and there, of course, was an important, because she had an important role. The Tawaifs usually had a designated area within the city. Also, if you're familiar with the city of Delhi, the area of Chowri Bazaar would have been the area where you would have had all the kotas of the Tawaifs lined one after the other, and people would go there in the evenings. It is at this courtesan's house that Walter Reinhardt, the German mercenary, actually saw Farzana, as she was known then, for the first time and started to fancy her. Now, a lot of people who have actually documented this speak about how beautiful she was and how wonderfully good looking and beautiful she was growing up to be like. And it's interesting to note she's just 14, 15 years old, and people are already talking about her beauty. And probably that was the reason why Walter Reinhardt, when he saw her for the first time, he started to fancy her. From there, her journey begins towards the direction of becoming Begum Samru. And she does become part of, if you can call, Reinhardt's harem. And some of the historians also mention her as his concubine. Now, the reason why the word concubine is used and not wife, because we don't have any historical evidence stating clearly that they were married. We don't have any record of that, and therefore, concubine is the word that is used for her in terms of her initial association with Reinhardt. It was her who started to use the title of a begum, which is equivalent to a wife, much later. And but again, begum was something that she started using on her own. No written documentation about her being married to Reinhardt. Now, from there, the journey changes, and the fact that a lot of people who are writing about Begum Samru concentrate a lot on her physicality in terms of her beauty and her height. I personally feel it sort of takes away a little bit from her, because she was not just a pretty face. She had the brains, she had the intellect, and she was a valiant woman who actually went out with her husband to most of his military campaigns. She was also very shrewd, and that helped her husband in many, many ways. She was just not a just calling her a pretty face was probably not the best description for her. Now, she was 14, 15 years old when she meets Reinhardt. And Reinhard was 45 years old at that point in time. He was already married, and he also had a son. He also had a son from his Muslim wife, previous Muslim wife. And it's interesting to note that when Reinhard passes away in 1779, if I'm not mistaken, or 1778. It was a very seamless sort of transition from for his men from being his men to her men. And there was no contention in terms of the fact that they wanted not to be governed by a lady, or probably by Reinhardt's son, because his son was not very smart. He was not very smart intellectually. He didn't have a personality who could actually take sort of take the lead of so many men as well. And therefore, what happens is Begum Samru takes charge of the men and the resources, and takes it forward from there. Most of the time, when people speak about Begum Samru, they usually try and concentrate on the fact that she was making alliances, she was shifting sides, keeping in mind her requirement in place and things like that. But what is also interesting to note is that um, she was shrewd enough and intelligent enough to make the right alliances at the right time, because she was in an alliance with the Jats, with the Marathas, with the French, with the Sikh, and she just had a very good understanding of the situation when she needed to move from one alliance to another. Having said that, she didn't have everything going her way all the time, because she was actually, as she had the highs, she had the lows as well. After Reinhardt's death, after a couple of years, she married again, this time to a Frenchman, and that resulted almost into a revolt by her men. And she had to flee. She was captured and supposedly then freed by an Irishman who was her lover. So she has had her situations as well, where she has been put in a sticky situation. The interesting thing about her is that she knew how to conduct herself, and she knew exactly when to sort of come out of an alliance and out of a situation, and how to bail herself. Now, um, another very important thing about Begum Samru is the fact that everybody says that she was a Mughal, sorry, not Mughal, sorry, a Muslim lady who was a courtesan, and she rises up in the ranks to be sitting in the court with the Mughal emperors. She is fighting battles, and how is she able to do all of this? it was it was a mix of a lot of things. It was a lot of it was her demeanor, what she was projecting physically about herself, and a lot of things. And people who have been coming for the walks, and who've been reading about art history, that a lot of visual representation actually helps the rulers, the nobles, to project a certain kind of an idea to the populace, and to people visiting them and looking at their artwork. And therefore, Begum Samru actually used all of this to her advantage. And I am going to share with you examples of two paintings, and talk a little bit about her architecture in Delhi, and how all of these things actually helped her in creating an image for herself, and uplifting her stature in a predominantly male dominated nobility. And I mean, she came to the ranks of the nobles and would sit with them and have intellectual discussions and plan strategies for wars and battles and things like that. So, the first example that I want to share with you is also the photo that I had shared on my post of Begum Samru. Now, if you just give me a second, please. Okay, so that image that I shared, the original work is in the Victoria and Albert Museum right now, and extensively used in books and articles. If you look up for Begum Samru, it is going to be up there on the net as well. Uh, what is absolutely fascinating is that this image that I had shared, you can see it right now, that I had shared, uh, it has so many details, and the size of it is just 10.5 centimeters by 8.5 centimeters. It's a small miniature portrait of Begum Samru, and the style in which it has been depicted is sort of a hybrid style of what is known as company paintings also. Now, most of it, the oval shape, the portrait, is very typical to the Mughal miniatures that you would see during Jahangir's period. And what they've done is they've used some amount of European elements in it to create volume, depth, and perspective, basically. Now, in this photo, I'll take you through the image so that you know what I'm talking about. Now, one of the most important things, and I'm sorry if the photo is not of good quality, but you can Google it and you'll find really nice quality of it, and you can go back to it and have a look at it. Okay. Um, Here what's happening is, if you look at this image, right on top here, the crescent shape that you see being formed right here, right on top, that crescent is actually the fold of the curtain that's hanging at the back. And you can see the drapes right here at the back as well, folded and tied up. Please look at the details of the drapes. The golden that you see is the border, and the drape actually presents an image of prosperity, because they are nice, thick, beautiful drapes set right behind the image of Begum Samru. Excuse me. What is also happening is that when you look at her image, this is painted by an artist called Jeevan Ram, and he was in the court of Begum Samru for a very long time. This painting is painted when Begum Samru was approximately 65 years old, and therefore you can see that it takes a very long time for her to sort of think of getting a portrait made and come out of her veil. So you see, she doesn't have a veil, but what she has is that she's wearing a cap. And usually, a lot of her imagery would be seen her wearing a cap or a turban. Both images of which here you can see the Kashmiri cap, and then around her on her head, that's the Kashmiri shawl that you see all around. Please have a look at the details of the shawl right here. The shawl that you can see, the detailing that has gone in here. It's interesting how much detailing has been done on what she's wearing and what she is holding. What you can see her hold is actually the snake of the hookah. And that's quite spectacular, because it's very rare that you will see women during the medieval times, one, getting their portraits done in this manner, and secondly, holding on to a hookah. The hookah actually is usually seen as a symbol of masculinity, and usually will be seen in portraits of rulers and nobles, men predominantly. Here you see that symbol here in her hand. That enhances her image as the important one. The other thing, if you would be familiar with, is the known as a nimbus, and nimbus is usually signified as similar to a halo. Halo is usually on the head of pious people, holy people, people to do with spirituality. Nimbus is usually shown on just behind the head of rulers and important people. So here, the drape that you see at the back is sort of forming a crescent shape and somewhat barely making a halo or a nimbus. And that was the idea. These are like small little details of iconography that are visible. The other thing that you see here in the back, the foliage that you see, the detailing in the foliage is really less. It's hazy, it's blurred, and that idea is actually just giving the idea of perspective and depth. When you look at the drapes of her shawl, you can see a lot of shading in there, and that's adding the idea of volume. Now, usually, what would happen is that people would make their own portraits like that, get them commissioned to give them out as gifts to other nobles and other dignitaries who are visiting them or if we're visiting them. So, this image is constantly sort of replicated and painted over and over again. You can see a lot of variations of this. Another similar image by Jeevan Ram actually shows Begum Samru with where she has aged more than what you can see right here. The other thing interesting here is that though Begum Samru's beauty is something that everybody talks about, here in the realism of the photo, she's not particularly made very beautiful as one would expect her as the descriptions go. So probably here, because she's already 65 years old, she's been part of many military campaigns. There is a sense of hardening of her as a person as well, and that is what you can see here. So that's about this imagery and the kind of message that it's trying to get across to everybody is one of a lady who is strong and who holds a lot of power and holds a lot of respect and command. So that is what is represented here. And there is another image which is this one right here. And this is also very easily available on online sources. This one is from Chester Betty Library in Dublin, and it's in their collection. You can visit the website, you can have a better view of it. It's worth noticing the kind of details that you see in the painting here. First of all, in this image, for the first time, actually not for the first time, but there are very few examples of so many people depicted in one single miniature painting, and especially in a courtroom scene. You don't usually see that. It's not very common. You will see people in probably a war scenario if it is depicted, or if there is a celebration that you will see at a marriage party, you will see. But in a courtroom, so many people being depicted in the courtroom is actually quite rare. And this is one of your rare examples that you see right here. And interestingly, she is shown seated right here in the center. Right here in the center, she has two European men sitting right next to her. That's her in the center with the hookah in front. There you see, and you have the two European gentlemen sitting right next to her. One of them is her adopted son. Now, what's happening here is that all of these men who are sitting all around her are basically aristocrats from her Jagir, from Sardhana, because Sardhana is close to Meerut, and it had lots of villages attached to it as a Jagir. These are all aristocrats who are visiting the court at that point in time, and the purpose for their visit is to greet and meet these five men that you see here, sitting diagonally in the center of the carpet that you can see right in front of Begum Samru, not making any eye contact, but sitting right in front of her diagonally, and all the aristocrats are right there to meet them. Now, these five gentlemen who are sitting there are actually Nawabs from the Mughal court, and there is a Bakshi who is there. So four Nawabs and one Bakshi who is seated there. Now, how do we have so much of information about this painting? Thankfully, is because the artist Muhammad Azam has actually written down meticulously the names of every single person who has actually been painted onto the painting right here. So behind the painting, you have the names of everybody who is shown right there. Now, if you look back onto the painting here, you can actually see the hookah and the detailing of the drapery and the shawl, everything that I mentioned. You can actually notice it right here as well. Let me just zoom it in for you so that you can see it in a little better manner. There you go. So you can see that, and you can see the hookah right in front. The detailing of the hookah is also quite spectacular. You can see the mat under the hookah that has also been detailed out in the painting. Now, both these paintings, the earlier one and this one, pays a lot of attention to detailing out Begum Samru because one, they're commissioned by her. The other thing is that she is the most important character right there. If you look back onto the painting right here, behind where Begum Samru is sitting, there are these big doorways. There are five doorways, and she's aligned to the one which is right in the center, which could be a representational view of her house in the old city. Old city in Delhi, which is known as Begum Samru Ki Haveli, currently known as Bhagirath Palace. And hardly, if you go there, you can hardly see the architecture there, but probably representational of that house. So these two images are what were extensively used to project her in a certain image. Now, Begum Samru was a Mughal lady who had later on, after the death of her husband Reinhard, she converted to Christianity. Now, it's not very clear why did she convert to Christianity, but she did, and she encouraged a lot of colonial architecture as well. Her estate in Sardhana is very famous for her palatial house and for the cathedral that she built right there. And apart from these paintings, Swapna ma'am, as a reminder today, had shared another photo, which was relief work on a marble slab, which is at the base of the memorial that was constructed by her son, who is actually painted here. Her son, adopted son, 23 years 23 years post her death as a memorial. And we know for a fact that there are multiple memorials for people all over India, for men and nobles and rulers. It's quite rare to find a memorial for a female ruler, and so it's quite rare in that form. And the relief that ma'am shared was actually commemorating an event, the consecration of the church from 1822, and that's where you see Begum Samru, and you realize that she was not a very big built lady. She was not very tall. She was short, but she was much more than her physicality. So these are the two photos, and some of you might be familiar with this book, Julia Kay's book on Begum Samru. And if I remove the jacket, you will realize that this is the image that I just shared with you that has been represented on it. That's the image that you see. And on the cover, you have Begum Samru, and that would have been the center of the painting that I just shared with you. Uh, Paintings were one thing. She used architecture also very intelligently to her benefit. Though she had converted to Christianity, and we know for a fact that she was entertaining people a lot. She was throwing some lavish parties, and the idea of these lavish parties was also for her to project an image for herself, for the creation of a particular image. And therefore, if I can show you this photo here, and some of you will be familiar with this photo right here. So that's the southern view of Begum Samru's Haveli in Delhi, and that is the northern view of Begum Samru's Haveli right here. Now, some of you definitely would have been to Old Delhi and seen her uh, former palatial house, and you would realize that it you can't look at the building the way you can see the photos right now, because it's very densely constructed around. You have a big market area that functions from inside the building and immediately outside the building, so there isn't any place where you can actually step back and look at the building in its totality. So you have nooks and corners where you can actually see that happening. Apart from the house, the palatial house, she also had a really big, so to say, orchard, garden, and enclosure in front of her palatial house. And she was given this by the British through the Mughal rulers after 1803, when the Marathas were defeated. So this was given to her in lieu of her support to the British to chase the Marathas out of Delhi. And when you look at the positioning of her palatial house in the old city, it's quite interesting because it's very close to the Red Fort. It's just across the road from the Lahori gate of the Red Fort. It was a very large space, and in a congested, busy commercial city, to have been awarded such a large plot of area said a lot. Ideally, if people didn't know about it as Begum Samru's Haveli, they would probably think that it was of uh, an officer of the East India Company whose residence it was, or somebody important in the East India Company who would have been given that house. But it was Begum Samru's, and that is where she was entertaining a lot of people, and she did make a colonial building, a palatial colonial neoclassical inspired building. She had a portico, she had a porch, she had a salon where she would actually entertain everybody. But she also, within the quarters, the private quarters, she did have a zanana area as well, and she had the hammam. So she had not let go of her Muslim roots and her traditional understanding of a household and things like that. Those private quarters were, of course, for her. She was only entertaining people in the more public domain of her house. And I would just like to read a passage about a description of a dance, or rather a nach, that happened at Begum Samru's house in Delhi in 1809. And this is by a person called Adir in 1809. And this is how he describes the performance at Begum Samru's house in Delhi. So he says, at the Begum Samru's palace, we found 30 persons of rank assembled and a splendid banquet in the European style. This ended, she arose and threw over the shoulders of each of the ladies a wreath of flowers formed of a tuberose plant united by narrow gold ribbons. No sooner was she reseated than strains of soft music were heard, and two folding doors of the saloon flew open as if by enchantment, discovering a number of young girls in the attitude of dancing a ballet, or, as it is here termed, a nach. It appeared to me, however, little more than a display of attitudes. Indeed, their feet and ankles were so shackled by a large gold ring of more than an inch in thickness and bells strung around another. That springing of the ground must have been impracticable. In fact, their dancing consisted in jingling these bells in unison with the notes of the musical instruments, which were played by the men educated for the purpose. To this music, they gave effect by appropriate motions of the hands, eyes, and person, not forgetting the most expressive vehicles of sentiments, the eyes. Their movements were by no means devoid of grace, particularly when accompanied by the voice. Although the tones were in my idea extremely harsh and frequently discordant. Seldom more than three girls perform at a time, and with the characters, they changed the figures. They performed a tale admirably, for by attending to different gestures, it was as easily comprehended as it had been recited. One more superbly dressed than the other came forward alone to go through the motions of flying a kite, which he performed to admiration and with peculiar grace. So that was the last of what I wanted to describe to you about Begum Samru's paintings and buildings. And the description right here speaks volumes about her stature and her importance in the nobility at that point in time. Because the shackles that he talks of gold shackles of 1 inch thickness, are the anklets that they are wearing, and then the ghungroos that they are wearing. So this is where I stop. I can go on for longer. I can see the time, it's 40 minutes already. So I'm going to stop talking now. And I think I'm just going to scroll down and see if there are some questions and if I can answer those questions for everybody's benefit. Everybody who joined in, thank you so much. Thank you for taking out the time. And this was a little weird for me because I don't do this in front of a screen at all. It's difficult to talk about people being there and making any eye contact, but I hope you all enjoyed it. And I'm just going to quickly scroll through the comments and see if there are any questions. Just please give me a moment. Okay, so the question that were Walter's men all foreigners? No, not necessarily all were foreigners. There were a lot of Indians who were part of his retinue, so to say. And the idea of mercenaries at that point in time was we have an idea that when we most people have the idea that when we are talking about mercenaries, we are just talking about Europeans coming in and leading their contingent of men. But there were a lot of Indian mercenaries also. So you had the Rajputs, you had the Gosais, you had the Afghans who were who were their own mercenaries with their own men. So no, not all his men were foreigners. Somebody's asked for my introduction. You already know my name. My name is Jaya. I freelance as a researcher and a heritage consultant as well. I have been doing the walks for Intac for quite some time now, and that's why I'm doing this live via Intac. Yeah, so this portrait was at the exhibition as well. Yes, at National Museum. I can share the images, Rohan. These images are very easily available online as well, but if you want, I will share them. Madhusmita, you can meet me anytime. Yes, the book Anarchy has a lot of details. Actually, it goes into the details of her military expeditions. Najaf Khan, who I didn't speak about, was somebody who one of the last very important generals for the Mughal, and he was literally the last hope of resurrecting the Mughal Empire for the rulers. And it's interesting that she accompanies him on a lot of expeditions. The book Anarchy actually goes into a lot of details about Walter Reinhardt's experience in India and his movement in India from where he started and how he landed in Delhi and so on and so forth. Um, I will not speak about the Sardhana estate because I'm not very well versed with it. So maybe I'll do a little bit more research on it, and next topic could be on the Sardhana estate. The video is going to be available. It's a public video. I will keep it open for everybody. Okay, I don't think so. I have missed on any questions. Come to the end of the scroll. So I think I'm going to stop the video here. Thank you all for joining. And if you still have some more, if you have any other questions, you can leave them in the comment. This is a public video. I'm going to save it so I can come back to you on your questions. Thank you for joining. Have a good day. Bye.